Veterinary medicine is a messy business, both physically and emotionally. Vetsplaining is one veterinarian's attempt to explain and understand her own profession a little better. Join Dr. Lisa McFadden as she delves deep into the medical and business aspects of veterinary medicine. We are back, and we're going to switch it up a little bit. We are going to talk about the FDA advisory alerts that have come out in the last few months. We will start with the alert issued on September 20th, 2018, and this was concerning oral flea and tick preventatives. The FDA has a division called the Center for Veterinary Medicine, and a lot of what this division does is they'll issue alerts to the veterinary community and to the general public about possible issues with medications or feed or food, in the case if you're not a large animal. And the issue alerted in September talked about potential neurologic reactions to a specific class of oral flea and tick preventatives called isoxazoline. And medications that are found within this family include Bravecto, Simparica, NexGard, and Credelio. Credelio is the newest. It's produced by Elanco. NexGard is produced by Marielle, which is now owned by Boehringer Ingelheim, also called BI. Simparica was released by Zoetis, and Bravecto was released by Merck. And in this area in Northern Virginia, I do not advocate use of Bravecto. Bravecto has the benefit of being a 3-month oral flea and tick preventative, but because this is such a highly tick endemic area, it does not cover all of the ticks that we need protected against for the entire 3 months, so I do not recommend that product. The isoxazoline family came out really because of the need for an alternative to your traditional topical flea and tick preventatives. And there are some issues associated with those. There's some irritation at the application site. Some dogs, if they're like mine, act like the medication is boring into their brain, and then they spend an hour just like rubbing on your furniture and your carpet and your walls. And because of the alcohol base, a lot of times it'll like strip your paint. And aside from that being kind of gross, it's also very frustrating because then you don't know how much of the medication is on your pet versus on your furniture, and I'm pretty sure it does not provide protection against your furniture. So they came up with this oral flea and tick preventative for ease of administration. Also, you can't wash it off, right? So if you apply any of the topical flea and tick medications and they do a lot of swimming, there is a chance that it can reduce the efficacy or the potency. And things like Vector 3D, which offer mosquito prevention, which is great, that also can be washed off if they are swimming a lot or if you have to bathe them a lot, like if you have a dog with a lot of skin issues. So the other kind of concept that they came up with was there are a lot of people that are concerned about applying a pesticide, which, to be honest, this is what it is. You apply a pesticide to your pet monthly. And a lot of individuals were concerned about adults and especially children touching their pet and potentially absorbing some of the medication. And we could do, honestly, a whole other topic about that. But the way most of them work is they are either absorbed into the sebaceous glands, which is kind of like their oil glands, because they don't have true sweat glands like people do, because remember, dogs sweat through their paws and pant. So they get absorbed into the sebaceous glands and then spread throughout the body like that, or they get absorbed into the sebaceous glands and then absorbed in the bloodstream, and they're still spread systemically. So another thought was, well, if we're not worried about this pesticide being bloodborne, right, we're not worried about it getting absorbed systemically, why not give it orally? Usually they like it. You don't have to worry about petting your pet and having your child or an immunocompromised individual touch it. And it is in the blood. So the downside with the oral flea and ticks is that the animal does, the flea or tick does have to actually bite the pet because it is in the blood. So they have to bite, take an initial blood meal in order for the product to be effective. At Independent Hill Veterinary Clinic, we carry NexGard and Credelio for a variety of reasons, including safety, ease of administration, effectiveness, and I consider that to be paramount in our canine patients. I do think it's very effective. NexGard actually now has a label as a preventative against Lyme disease, which is pretty cool because, again, Virginia is just like 99% ticks, at least Northern Virginia is. And even though it's not labeled as a known effective prevention against, let's say, your Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, the hope is that if it has shown effectiveness against Lyme, there may be a greater likelihood that it'll prevent infection with other tick-borne diseases. Unfortunately, none of these oral flea and tick medications are labeled for cats. Cats, as we all know, are half alien, so they may or may not eat it because anytime you give them anything new, they just assume you're trying to poison them. But eventually that may be something that we can look into. And since the release of NexGard and now Credelio, these medications are not labeled for patients with pre-existing history of seizures. That's just how they came out onto the market, and that's how the drug reps explained it to us. And I want to be very clear about this. These drugs do not cause seizures. What can happen is that every mammal has what's called a seizure threshold. Okay, this is the frequency at which random firing of nerve cells in the brain, called neurons, can just go off randomly and not trigger a seizure. So if you think about your neurons as they can fire because they're told to, they can fire independently, and enough of them fire independently, it can basically cause an area of the brain that is firing aberrantly or inappropriately, which can then result in a seizure. The presentation of the seizure depends on where in the brain that random firing is happening. So every mammal is born with what's called a seizure threshold, and almost every drug can theoretically affect the seizure threshold, either raising it, making it harder for them to have a seizure. Those are mostly, we think of, our anti-epileptics, or potentially lowering it. And a lot of times we don't know if drugs lower the seizure threshold until they've been on the market for a while and we can find out. In the case of these oral flea and tick preventatives, they're not recommended in patients with pre-existing history of seizures, tremors, head bobs, uncontrolled limb movements. And the theory is that they lower the seizure threshold, or they can lower the seizure threshold. And it doesn't mean that your average animal that was never going to have seizures in their life will have a seizure after taking NexGard, Credelio, Simparica, Bravecto. What it means is that if you have a dog who has a naturally lowered seizure threshold, and they are given a medication that further lowers that seizure threshold, then they could have a seizure. The problem is that unless that patient has a known history of seizures, you have no idea if they have a lower seizure threshold. At this time, there's no genetic testing, there's no physical exam testing that can tell you if they have a naturally lower seizure threshold. So as a general rule, in pets, if they have a history of seizures or weird neurologic like twitching, tremoring, head bobbing, I don't recommend it. And the problem is that when these drugs came on the market, all of the drug reps that I talked to were very open and honest about this. And the question is, were they not as explicit to every veterinarian? Did every veterinarian not ask as much questions? Did the veterinarians just not explain it to the clients as much? So this alert that came out really was unnecessary, because this is information that veterinarians knew. This is information that we were telling our clients, or we should have been telling our clients. So unfortunately, mostly what this did was it just scared a bunch of owners that had been using these oral flea and tick preventatives without issues. I personally do not carry Simparica or Bravecto. I mentioned the reasons for Bravecto. Part of it also is just having an integrative or more holistic background. It makes me nervous giving something that will be in the system for 3 months that I can't take back. So if they have an issue, there's no way for me to fix it except just wait it out. And Simparica, if you look at their studies when they were first trying to get FDA approval, they did have a higher incidence compared to NexGard and Credelio of abnormal tremoring, head bobbing, and just weird neurologic reactions. And the way that these medications are supposed to work is that they block an insect-specific brain GABA receptor. So everybody has GABA. Mammals have GABA. Humans have GABA, which we're humans have GABA, which we're mammals. But this was a GABA receptor, right? So the protein that accepts the GABA that is found only in insect brains. So in theory, it should not have any effects in animals. But again, it doesn't cause seizures. It just lowers the seizure threshold. Now, NexGard and Credelio are very, very safe, and they're actually labeled for puppies as young as 8 weeks. And what's interesting is that because Credelio was the last to the market, instead of just doing it, Credelio compared to like a placebo, they were actually able to compare Credelio's effectiveness against NexGard as well as side effects. And in the Credelio study, one patient developed head tremors, and the problem is that they also received a vaccine and an ear cleaning that day, and the head tremors resolved without issue or any treatment within 24 hours. So we don't know if it was the Credelio, if it was something else, but anytime you're doing a drug study, if there's something weird that happens, they have to put it on the label. And in NexGard's study, I believe it was 2 dogs that had pre-existing history of seizures, had a seizure within a certain period of time after receiving the NexGard. So again, on the NexGard label, it does not advocate use in pets with seizures. I feel very comfortable using NexGard and Credelio. I currently have an 11-year-old Beagle mix. He's taken NexGard for 3 years now without any problems. I've tried the Credelio with him as well. And so I am 100% comfortable, especially coming from an integrative medicine side, for recommending these oral flea and tick preventatives. And I think that the companies who make the products stand by the products and are very open and honest about them. And because there have been increased side effects that I've read about and I've seen in the initial FDA studies for Simparica, I do not recommend it. But again, the big thing is this is not new news. This is stuff we knew. It's just, I don't really know why all of a sudden they released it. I heard through the grapevine that this was actually an alert that was supposed to go out months and months and months ago, maybe even a year ago, but the FDA is the government, so things take a while sometimes. So it came out in September and just caused a lot of controversy. So again, it does not cause seizures, but it can lower the seizure threshold. So now let's talk about the grain-free fiasco. So in July 12th, 2018, the FDA issued a public notification stating that the agency was investigating the potential links between DCM, which is dilated cardiomyopathy, and dogs eating certain pet foods. Dilated cardiomyopathy is the short of it is a awful heart disease that causes basically the heart muscle to stretch and become less effective. So the heart gets bigger physically, the walls, the muscle lining of the heart gets thinner, and it's less able to effectively pump blood to the lungs or pump blood to the body, depending on where in the heart we're talking about. I think it was like in the 1950s when they first started making commercial cat and dog food. We did not know about certain amino acids that pets needed for survival. And in particular, cat foods were lacking in taurine. So a bunch of cats started dying from heart disease, which they later found out was dilated cardiomyopathy. And that's when we learned that both cats and dogs need taurine in their diet, cats usually more than dogs. And we have been very careful to ensure that all foods have enough taurine. What's interesting is that these grain-free foods touted themselves as being healthier because meat and frequently organ meat are one of the first ingredients listed, and your organ meats have tons of taurine. They're probably going to have more taurine than your regular muscle meat. And animals don't have the stigma of, ooh, it's a heart, ooh, it's a liver. And actually in the wild, or if you look at wolves, they're going to eat the organs first because that is the most nutritious. But what they found is that these pets that are not your classic breed now, that are getting cardiomyopathy, are on grain-free diets. And this day and age, the most common dogs to get dilated cardiomyopathy or DCM, again, it is an uncommon heart disease, but dogs that frequently get it are giant breed dogs. So we think of Great Danes, Mastiffs, Dobermans, and dogs in this report that they issued, this initial finding, are smaller breed dogs or golden retrievers. And they're not dogs that are typically known to get this heart disease. So the veterinary cardiologist said, okay, well, why are these patients getting this heart disease when they're not the classic breed? And one link they found was they were on grain-free diets. And in particular, they were on diets where the first ingredient was meat, but the second, third ingredient was a legume. So peas, beans, lentils, chickpeas. They also found, and peanuts, and then they also found potatoes potentially linked to it as well. And so the FDA has received reports of 30 dogs and 2 cats. And as of July, cardiologists had approximately 150 reports. And if you think about it, it's really hard to get veterinarians to agree on anything, let alone to get a cardiologist to kind of group together and look at this one specific topic. So it is something that's very important, and we need to figure it out. But no one knows why it's happening, and no one knows if it really is the diet. And so right now, what they're trying to figure out is it the diet? And if it's the diet, is it a taurine